I hope you're up for this, because the fight is on. The battle is raging, and I hope you're up for it. It was back in 1848 that a couple of German political philosophers decided to publish a pamphlet that would articulate their views of what they saw as a new social utopia. It became the most influential political pamphlet published in the Western world in the last 200 years. The two authors were two men named Friedrich Engels and Karl Marx, and they called their pamphlet the Communist Manifesto. Now, I'm reluctant to even bring it up because I think it's such a pedantic piece of literature with so many presuppositions that are really not rational. And if we've learned anything from the last 100 years, we've learned the destructive nature of their presuppositions. But it's important for us to remember something important, that Marx and Engels declared war on two very important social institutions. They declared war and sought the destruction of the institutions of faith. In the Communist Manifesto, Engels and Marx write this, in case you are uncertain of their antagonism. They say this in the second chapter: "The charges against communism made from a religious, a philosophical, and generally from an ideological standpoint are not deserving of serious examination." Really? When the ancient world was in its last throes, the ancient religions were overcome by Christianity. But communism abolishes eternal truths. It abolishes all religion and all morality. I think all of us are familiar with Marx and Engels' antagonism toward institutional and established religion and faith, because they believed it would be impossible for a person to have both loyalty to God and loyalty to the state. So they believed that the morality, particularly Judeo-Christian morality, had to be overthrown. But what you may not be aware of is that they believed that faith was directly connected to another social institution that they fought to destroy and abolish, and that is the family. This is what Marx and Engels say in the second chapter of the Communist Manifesto. Abolition, Aufhebung is the German word, of the family, exclamation point. In its completely developed form, the family exists only among the bourgeoisie. The bourgeois family will disappear as a matter of course when its complement vanishes, and both will vanish with the vanishing of capital. Do you charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents? To this crime we plead guilty. The bourgeois claptrap about the family, about the hallowed co-relationship of parents and child, becomes all the more disgusting as the family and their children are transformed into simple articles of commerce and instruments of labor. See, Marx and Engels understood something that we too easily forget, that faith and family are interrelated, that the strength of the family is the place in which faith is incubated, and it is the strength of faith that speaks into the survival of the family, that they are connected in ways that make both of them significant. Today I want to talk about not just the relationship between family and faith. I want to talk about what do we do when we realize that both our faith and our family are under attack. When we realize that we are in a struggle and we are in the fight of our lives. How do we stand against it? What do we do to strengthen both our family and our faith? You up for that? If you're not up for that, when I pray in just a minute, just go ahead and slip out and turn off your computer, shut off. But if you stay, I will make the bold assumption that you're up for it. Would you pray with me? Father in heaven, I would ask that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart would be pleasing in your sight, that you would use your word spoken by your servant, anointed by your Spirit, to challenge us to see the immutable blessing that is in our family and in our faith, and that we might make them both a blessing. Pray that for myself and for my family and for all of us here, for I ask that in Jesus' name. Amen. Over the last few months, beginning at the beginning of September and going all the way to Thanksgiving, we are studying on Sunday mornings one subject, the subject of faith. And that subject is based on the writing of one chapter of a letter in the New Testament, the letter that is called the letter to the Hebrews. The 11th chapter is a chapter that is dedicated to helping us understand the nature of our faith. In fact, it begins in the very first verse with a concise definition of faith. The author of the book of Hebrews in 11:1 tells us that faith is the confidence we have in the things that we hope for, the assurance of the things that we do not yet see. The author of the book of Hebrews doesn't leave that there, though. The author then begins to give us examples, set up exemplary ideas of what faith looks like in the people who are part of the heritage of the nation of Israel, people who represented their faith and well-known biblical characters. The author of the book of Hebrews begins by pointing to the faith of Abel, the son of Adam and Eve, who was murdered by his brother Cain. He then talks about the faith of Enoch, a man whose faith was so intimate with God that the threshold between life and death became irrelevant. Then Noah, the one that we perhaps are most familiar with, the guy who built the ark and collected the animals and preserved his family by faith. But what is interesting is the next 5 people that the author of the book of Hebrews highlights are all from one family. The first one is Abraham. He is the patriarch of the family, the patriarch of the nation of Israel, of the people of God. The next person is his wife, Sarah, who is the mother of the people of God, of the nation of Israel. Then it highlights their son, their only son, miraculously born, Isaac. And then it highlights one of Isaac's 2 sons, Jacob. And it ends in the 4th generation with a highlight of the 11th of Jacob's 12 sons, Joseph. And what he highlights and today we come to the person of Jacob. And in Hebrews chapter 11, verses 20 and 21, the author of the Hebrews says, this is the most important thing for you to know about the faith of Jacob. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 20, it says that by faith, Isaac blessed his sons, Jacob and Esau, with regard to their future. And by faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshiped as he leaned on the top of his staff. Really? This is what we're supposed to know about faith from these 2 verses? If you study the life of Jacob takes up half of the book of Genesis. He is born in Genesis chapter 25, and his death is recorded in the last chapter of book of Genesis, in Genesis 50. Half of the book of Genesis covers the life of Jacob. And the only thing you can pick out of his life is that. I mean, you go through Jacob's life in Genesis chapter 25, the story of his birth. He's a twin. And it's the story of grabbing his brother's heel, Esau's heel, who was born first. And it's an amazing story. That's why it's called Jacob, because Jacob means the deceiver or the manipulator. Or maybe you focus on the story about how he made his brother a stew and he stole his brother's firstborn birthright for basically a cup of porridge. And his brother became so enraged at him that he threatened to kill him when his father was dead. You can look at the story in Genesis chapter 28 where he meets Robert Plant in the desert and they write a song together called "The Stairway to Heaven." That's all I got for you today. That's as good as it's going to get. I thank you for your sympathetic laughter. But most of us know it as Jacob's ladder. He has a vision of a stairway or a ladder that goes to heaven, and God is at the top of the stairs. And he pronounces a blessing over Jacob's life, and he says, "I know you're a mess, but I'm still going to bless you. I will always have your back." Or maybe you highlight the story. You want an example of Jacob's faith, his story of his wives. He goes to his mother's ancestral homeland in the Euphrates River Valley in a town called Paddan Aram. And he meets a man named Laban who has two daughters, an older daughter named Leah, a younger daughter named Rachel. He falls in love with Rachel. He says, "What can I do to marry Rachel?" And he says, "Work for me for free for 7 years." And he does. And on his wedding night, he must have gotten just fall down drunk because his father-in-law switches Rachel and Leah. And he wakes up in the morning having consummated his marriage with the wrong woman. And so he goes, but I really want to marry Rachel. And he says, "Okay, work for me for another 7 years." So for 14 years, he works for his father-in-law. During that time, he has 12 children through 4 different women. He works another 6 years, and after 20 years, he decides that he's going to take all of his family and all of his servants and all of his flocks and go back to Canaan. But he remembers that his brother Esau is there. And just before he crosses the Jordan River, he has an encounter with the pre-incarnate Christ. He has basically a WWE cage match with Jesus. And he wrestles with God to the point where his hip is dislocated and his name is changed from Jacob to Israel, because Israel means one who wrestles with God. The nation of Israel is a nation of people who wrestle with God. You mean to tell me out of all of those stories, the author of the book of Hebrews couldn't find something to teach us about his faith that was so important from all of those adventures? All you have to do is change the names of the places and the names of the characters, add a few castles and a few dragons, and you have a season of the Game of Thrones, for crying out loud. There's a lot going on there. And so what we wind up with is Hebrews 11, 20 and 21, where it basically says, "And by faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau with regard to their future. And by faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshiped as he leaned on the top of his staff." What? Look at it closely, though. What does it say? Because the key here is the word blessed. Because the architecture of the family, the essence of the family, is the passing on and the receiving of blessing. The family is the place where we are blessed, that has the potential to bless us as no other relationship can. It is in the family where we are blessed just because we are. For those of you who are new to Riverbend, or those of you who've been around Riverbend, you realize that Riverbend Church exists primarily because of the way that God worked through one incredible man. His name is Dr. Gerald Mann. And Dr. Gerald Mann was a once-in-a-lifetime communicator and leader and a charismatic individual. And we are here today because Gerald Mann was the voice and he was the face of Riverbend Church. But let me tell you who the heart of Riverbend Church is. The heart of Riverbend Church was his co-pastor, Dr. Gordon Smith. Now, I don't want to speak about Dr. Smith in terms as if he's gone. He's still here. He actually still comes to church here and leads a community group here. And on dozens of occasions, I've had the privilege of participating with him in weddings and in funerals and memorial services and celebrations of life. And I can tell you from my professional experience, Dr. Smith is a pastor's pastor. And he is the heart of what Riverbend is. And in those funeral services that I have been privileged to participate with and attend, where Dr. Smith is officiating, he always says the same thing. In the tenderness that only a true pastor can have, he talks to the grieving family. And every time he does it, it is intentional and sincere. Whether he's talking to the mothers or the fathers or the brothers or the sisters or the husbands or the wives or the aunts or the uncles, he reminds them of the blessing that came from this relationship. And the way he says it is the blessing of just who you are. It is the prerogative of the family. It is the power of the family to remind us that we are priceless. That we are made in God's image, and each of us is precious. And it's in the family that we know that. And I know it's absolutely true because I have experienced it 3 times in my life. I have experienced love at first sight 3 times in my life because I have 3 daughters. And I can tell you when my wife was pregnant, I didn't get it. Even the 3rd time, it's like, here's the sonogram. Yeah, that's a kid in there somewhere, sure. And she would, when the baby was rolling around, she'd say, look at that. I'm like, oh no. But I was there. I was there. The moment they breathed their first breath. And from the moment I saw them, I loved them. And I knew in that moment that I would do anything to protect them and provide for them. And it was not because of anything they had accomplished. It was not because of anything they had achieved. It was not because they were attractive. They were just balls of goo with mucus all over them. They were disgusting. But they were perfect and they were beautiful. And I bless them just because they are. You see, in a world where the tsunami is trying to tear down our faith and our family, it is by faith that we experience in the essence of a family the blessing just because we are. It is the prerogative and the power of a family to express that and to receive that. But it's interesting. In Hebrews 11:21, it says that by faith Jacob, when he was dying, what is the significance where it says, well, why is it in the last moments of his life? And as I thought about that, I realized there was something that my parents and my in-laws said to me dozens of times. They would say, we never want to be a burden to you. We have made plans so that we don't have to be a burden to you. And the hardest thing for a family to do is to understand where the line is between providing for our children and challenging our children. Where the line is between protecting them and giving them the responsibility to protect us. It was a year after my grandfather died. He died when I was 11. The next summer, I was at the farm, and my uncle and my father sat me down. And they sat me down at the kitchen table, and they said, hey, Dave, now that Grandpa is gone, the farm is ours, and caring for the farm is ours. And because you are a member of this family, the responsibility for caring for this farm is yours. Now, what they were saying in a roundabout way was they're saying, you're going to work here, all summer and on your breaks when you're not in school, you're going to work on the farm, and we're not going to pay you. And I hated that idea. I was like, oh no, this is so unfair. But what they were teaching me was the thing that only a family can teach you, that there are responsibilities that you are capable of meeting. And while it's the hardest thing for us to do as parents, to know where those boundaries need to be, where the expectations need to be set, how high the goals are, we should always be people who, by faith, are challenging our children because we believe in them. You are capable of more than you know. There's a story about a young mom. She had 3 preschoolers. Her oldest daughter was 4. She had a 2-year-old and a newborn. So you can imagine what her life was like. It was at the limit. But her 4-year-old was very precocious, and she wanted to learn how to tie her shoes. So her mom taught her to tie her shoes. And she practiced and practiced, and sometimes it was just a knot, and she was so proud. I can tie my shoes, Mommy. I can tie my shoes, Mommy. And after a while, she got very good at tying her shoes. And one day they were in the grocery store, and the mom is trying to manage a 2-year-old and take care of a newborn, and the 4-year-old is trailing along, and her shoe comes undone. And right there in the produce aisle, she throws herself down and decides, and this is the magical power of toddlers, she knows exactly the right moment when you are least available, when you have the least margin to throw a fit. And she throws a fit right there in the grocery store and starts screaming, Mommy, tie my shoe, Mommy, tie my shoe. And the mother just keeps shopping, keeps managing the other 2 children, when this well-intentioned woman walks up and she says, is that your daughter? And she says, yeah, that's my daughter. She says, well, why don't you help her? And the woman pushes her cart away and says, I am. See, the blessing of a family is a blessing of the challenge. It is the blessing of the responsibility. When Jacob was dying, when he needed his family to step up, by faith he knew they would. But there's a third line in verse 21 where it says, by faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of David's sons and worshiped as he leaned on the top of his staff. What is the significance of him leaning on the top of his staff? Well, you go, well, duh, he was dying. Of course he's leaning on his staff. It's the only way he could be vertical. No, but it means more than that. See, the staff represents something. The Hebrew word is shevet. And in the Hebrew language, the shevet represented something very comforting. In the 23rd Psalm, it says, your rod and your shevet, your staff, they comfort me. It represented strength. It represented power. It represented authority. And what this image is portraying for us is the blessing that we give to our children when we put them on our shoulders and we say to them, it's your turn. You will succeed. You are now the one who is taking all that we have built, and you are going to do great things with it. I believe in you. And we set them up for success. It's interesting that what is recorded for us in the 49th chapter of the book of Genesis is the actual blessing that Jacob gave to Joseph's sons. It's in Genesis chapter 49, verse 22. Listen to this. He says, Joseph is a fruitful vine near a spring whose branches climb over a wall. With bitterness, archers attacked him. They shot at him with hostility, but his bow remained steady. His strong arm stayed limber because of the hand of the mighty one of Jacob, because of the shepherd, the rock of Israel. Because of your father's God who helps you, because of the Almighty who blesses you with blessings of the sky above, blessings of the deep springs below, blessings of the breast and the womb. Your father's blessings are greater than the blessings of the ancient mountains, than the bounty of the age-old hills. Let these rest on the head of Joseph, on the brow of the prince among his brothers. Well, that cleared it up, didn't it? No, it's poetry. It's Hebrew poetry. It is, in the Hebrew, the words rhyme and they have a rhythm. It's a song. It's a poem. And if you step back from the particular phrasing of it, what he is saying is the blessing that I am pronouncing over Joseph's sons is the blessing of empowering their father. It is the blessing of empowering the next generation. I am setting them up to succeed because that is our job. I have to apologize to you today because I'm going to wear you out. in the coming years, I'm going to tell you stories about this little girl named Frankie D. Howell, my first granddaughter. And I'm going to show you pictures of her, and I'm going to talk about her, and I know I'm going to do it. I can't help it. When I was a young dad, half the stories I told on Sunday, every Sunday I had an illustration about my kids, and now that I'm a grandfather, I'm going to wear you out about my granddaughter because she is adorable. So I'm sorry, not sorry. But she's 5 weeks old yesterday, 5 weeks old. She was born on Saturday, September 10th. Saturday morning, September 10th, I was committed to do a funeral for the wife of a friend of ours, in fact, a neighbor. And she had died a number of months before, and we had planned this funeral for September 10th because it was their wedding day. And on the morning of September 10th, I'm getting ready, I'm getting dressed, I'm thinking about my comments, and I get a text from my son-in-law. And Jeremy says, it's happening. The contractions are coming fast and steady. We're heading towards St. David's, and Frankie's coming. She's on her way. And I'm sitting there, and I know for the next 2 hours I'm going to be involved in this memorial service. I'm like, no, I can't be there. And I knew I couldn't do anything. What was I going to do? I'm the grandpa. I'm just going to sit around and look. Ugh. But I wanted to be there, but I wanted to be at this memorial service. So I went to the memorial service, and I was sitting on the front row of the chapel, and I had my phone next to me, and our family grouper text thread is like giving me moment-by-moment updates. And just before I'm supposed to stand up and speak to this family, and do my best Dr. Gordon Smith imitation, it comes across the text, we need an emergency C-section, we're taking Kaya into the OR. I'm like, no! I've got to be there. I have to tell you, I barely remember what I said. I remember that it was moving, and it was an honor to be a part of it. But as soon as it was over, I saw the family, and I said, my daughter's in labor. I've got to get over to St. David's. I've got to get there fast. And they said, we understand. Go, go, go. And I got changed, and I jumped in my Jeep. You ever driven across downtown Austin on a UT football Saturday? Oh, my gosh, I hit every red light, I promise you. And I was behind every tourist driving at parade float speed who was in the city of Austin that day. I was losing my mind. I finally get to St. David's. They have an 11-story parking garage. But you know what people from UT know? Is that when there's a home game, you park in the St. David's hospital parking garage. So I'm driving up and down these floors. There's no spaces. I'm getting these texts that she's in the OR, that they're doing this section. My baby girl's having our first grandchild, and I can't find a parking space. I finally get a parking space. I run in. I get up to the OB waiting room. My whole family is there. My son-in-law's dad is there, and everybody's updating me, and they hadn't heard anything. And I was there about 2 minutes when my son-in-law, Jeremy, comes out. He says, she's out, she's fine, the baby's fine. You can go in and see her, but one at a time. And everybody in the room looked at me and went, you go. You didn't have to tell me twice. And I just walked right in, and I walked past the nurse's station, and I'm like, where is she? And I pulled the curtain back, and there's my baby girl. And I was overwhelmed. And as I'm holding her and I'm crying, they bring Frankie in. And I thought that I would experience with her what I experienced with my daughters, that love at first sight thing, but it didn't. It was different. Because I watched the nurse take my granddaughter and put her in my daughter's arms. And I saw my baby with her baby, just like I was with her. And I realized I had done it. You see, for years, people would ask me, and Diane, what kind of parents are you? And I would say, I don't know. I won't know what kind of parent I am until I see my children as parents. And what I was seeing in that moment was job well done. Because I knew that she was going to be a great mom. And that Frankie was going to have an amazing mother. And that is the blessing that Jacob gave as he worshiped and he believed God. And he said, I am blessing the future generations with the trust and the confidence that they will be great. And it's in the family that these blessings take place. It's family that is the incubator. It's family where we receive the blessing just because we are. We receive the blessing of the challenge of responsibility, of building our character, of learning that we can do more than we realize. And it's in the family that we receive the blessing that you're going to be great. I'm going to put you on my shoulders and you're going to reach beyond where I could ever go. Now you may say, Dave, that's easy for you to say. Because if you know me well, you might realize as far back as I can go genealogically, on both sides of my family, my mother's side and my father's side, every family, every generation has been mom, dad, kids. Mom, dad, kids. Mom, dad, kids. My parents were married for 63 years. And it's the same with Diane's family. Diane's family, you go back 3 or 4 generations, mom, dad, kids, mom, dad, kids. Her parents were married for almost 70 years. I married the girl I met in high school. I married the girl I took to my senior high prom. She is the only woman I have ever known in a biblical sense. And if you know this, you say, Dave, you live in a bubble. What about the rest of us? What about those of us who are scratching and clawing and life has dealt us the hard hand and we're trying to hold our family together with coat hangers and duct tape? What about those of us who are single parents? What about those of us who are recovering from broken families and damaged families and dysfunctional families? What about those of us who are alone? The essence of the family is transferable, you see. The essence of the blessing we can find no matter how we construct the architecture of the family. How do I know this? Because of Jacob. Why do you think this is where the author of the book of Hebrews lands on Jacob? Because Jacob was a mess. His family was a dysfunctional train wreck. Jacob was a terrible brother. He was an even worse son. He was a horrible father. And he was a catastrophic husband. And yet he was able to be a recipient and an agent of blessing, because the essence of the blessing survives even the battle, even the struggle, if you'll fight for it, if you'll work at it. Because whether we realize it or not, it's under attack. It was in 1935 that another German political philosopher decided it was time for the world to be victimized by his ideology. And in 1935, he wrote a memoir, and he published it, and it's called Mein Kampf, My Struggle, My Battle. His name was Adolf Hitler. And while Adolf Hitler on the surface, and as you read through Hitler's memoir, you realize it's, oh my gosh, if Engels and Marx are presumptuous and pedantic, he's like so verbose. It's like, get to the point, Adolf. You keep circling the drain for 8 pages. I got it before. Come on. And you realize that even though he says, the 2 great enemies of the fatherland are communism and Judaism. If you read carefully enough, you realize that his ideology is exactly the same as Marx and Engels. The institutions that he needs to dismantle are faith and the family. because he knows that you cannot have loyalty to the state if you have a higher loyalty to God. And he knows that the incubator of that faith in God is in the family. And he aggressively sought not to dismantle the church and the family, but to neutralize them by making them servants of the fatherland. Now, there are people who believe that it was in the 20th century that we saw the greatest attack on the family and faith. But I don't think so. I think it goes back before that. It goes back to perhaps the Enlightenment, back to the time when the deconstructionist empirical movement started to question everything and question religion and question family structures and morality. But I think it actually goes back before that. It goes back before the time of Christ. It goes back before the patriarchs, back before Jacob, back before Noah and Enoch and Abel. It goes back to the day we got out of the garden. The fight has always been on. In the final chapter, the final paragraph of Engels and Marx's Communist Manifesto, they admit this. They say we're not hiding our antagonism to these things. We know that the struggle is real. They say this: the communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. We'll tell you what we're up to. We openly declare that the ends can only be attained by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Faith and the family. Working men of all countries unite. Whether we realize it or not, whether we're ready or not, whether we like it or not. The battle is on. The struggle is real. The question is, are you up for it? Because I am.